Thank you, Dan. I think we are all very tired, so we better go straight to the point and start the debate. There are common features that all the speakers have shared, I think. But we have talked about the usefulness of conceptualizing informality, and there were diverging opinions. Do we need to do that? We have talked about the urgency, the importance, and the variety of types of informality, which leads us to the problem of transferability of solutions. So, can we transfer solutions to other places? We have talked about the involvement of communities in the design process, which is a huge question. It also leads us to the question of sustainability of design solutions. So if we have a good idea, how do we ensure that that good idea is going to continue in time and in a context? And here I would like to make a reference to governance. We have talked about the role of governments, the market, communities, and finally we have talked about our role as designers and planners. So this is a very small list I made of topics I could identify in all presentations. But please, let's start with the questions. Yes, please.
In two of the beginning lectures, one of them by our friend Mohan, and I forgot the other one, they were showing one of the solutions that government is pushing for alternative solution for the slums, and they were like blocks quite close to each other.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you dismissed them outright without just, you mentioned that, okay, a third of the land is going to be used for those blocks, and 2/3 is going to be for property and for private investors. But what you forgot to mention is that what is the reaction of people who are now transferred from slums to those places? You mentioned that, okay, they lost probably their livelihood in the sense that, okay, the shop that they have, they don't have anymore. But that transformation couldn't be that as easy as simple as that.
No, right? so they actually require 70% of the slum to agree to undergo this transformation in the first place. Mm-hmm. So they do require the consensus among the inhabitants if they want that. But of course, what also happens is that people manage to get their votes in other ways as well. So it's not always that people actually vote and that's calculated correctly and then this happens. It also happens that the underworld sort of manages to fake votes. Yeah. So it doesn't happen so easily. But when it does happen in certain cases, in a lot of cases, actually people, what they do is to sell that apartment to someone else. And even though they're not allowed to do that for 10 years, that's the law, but they still manage to find a way of selling that. And it's extremely expensive real estate. So they earn a lot, and then they go back to living in a slum. So that's what happens. So actually it's not really it's not really improving the situation. So that's one of the things that happen, and a lot of people just end up doing this and then staying somewhere at the outskirts of the city again.
But then there is some capital that has been created from that transaction, right?
Yeah.
So they grow their business, or they get a bigger place in the
perhaps, but they probably then move out, or they're back to living. In certain cases, I've actually seen families that have moved just into the slum next door, and they live there and they try and carry on with their work with that additional income.
Let's try to keep the questions and the answers compact, so we have more time. More questions? Yes. Speak up.
You make questions to Roberto about Brazil.
Yeah.
So from Brazil, I'm making a question. And so as you guys said, and I know, we are very upset about the government and about the World Cup and the Olympics. And right now with the elections, Brazil is kind of divided in two. My question is, should we take more the power from the government or believe in social programs like My House, My Life?
Thanks for your question. I think the question relates to a lot of other questions that were made about the position of government and what you should do, kind of what people can do themselves. Sorry, I'll try to speak a little bit louder. But so what people can or communities can do themselves, but also how they relate to formal issues. I think that one of the reasons that we were able to kind of develop an idea like Casa Legal, so is the understanding of the formal world to find solutions. So you just made the question, I forgot your name, but about the Indian solution. So part of the commercial market is used to vitalize social housing. The thing that you showed is a not too beautiful solution for the people that need to live there. But on the other hand, we're doing something similar, but then in a way to realize good quality social housing. In Casa Legal, we buy more or less 20% is sold commercially to vitalize the whole setup. So an understanding of formal and also collaborating with formal programs exist. I think it's super important if you want to make a solution that is scalable. If you want to just to make some houses and to improve some houses, it's all very nice if that works and you put in a lot of energy. But to make it scalable, I think it's important to make this bridge. So that's also why I said that it's a little bit dysfunctional to think about formal and informal. We just need a solution to this.
Basically what we're trying to do for Brazil is make tools so that the people who are living in Paraisópolis and hopefully for other people too, use them to communicate with the existing authorities and make plans that the authorities can understand and use legal templates so they don't have to go to a lawyer and start from scratch. But you basically have an understanding of what you're proposing and you give the initiative to the people who are, it's more like bottom up, it's top down. But in the end, we're trying to get the communication going. That's basically.
Thanks. Other questions? I think we cannot forget that things happen in a legal framework. Even illegality and informality happen in states where there is sometimes a functioning state, sometimes a failed state, but the state is there. So how do you communicate with it? Yes.
I do without that.
Okay, you speak loud enough.
The question is not more or less government. It's a question of better government. I think it's very easy. Sorry? Yeah, probably government or what they call governance in the political science.
Functioning government.
Can I? The point is that you don't have to pick your government. You can say that you want good government or appropriate government or whatever government, but you have to deal with whatever
With the one that is there.
Yes, so you don't really have a choice. You can just try to work with them best you can.
Isn't that your job to try to enhance the government?
Well, maybe if you're a UN organization, maybe to a certain extent, but in many other cases, I don't really think it's your job per se to educate or improve government. That seems a rather big task, anyway.
There are many of
Just
them.
in a small scale.
We have a special guest from the IHS, Alexander Yakinov, who came here to give a reflection on the...
Thank you. I'm very grateful for having witnessed this discussion. I really enjoyed the many different aspects of informality that was looked at. I have to say, working in informality the last 15 years or so, many things are repeatedly there. So we have to recognize there is no immediate solution. And it's just my age, let's say 50 years, but we know about informality, we studied it as researchers, as practitioners, since 40 more years. So I think we have to really see what is the complexity of the term, and there was nuances mentioned that it's really difficult to say. You have to keep in mind it's just something we define as a formal sector. That was said also by Leo Sepulveda. It's nothing that we can't really define without recognizing the complexity of it, and then it will be always there. And also I am a bit anti-progressista. there is a lot of recognition that the world is getting a better place. And unfortunately, I don't think so. I think that the world is becoming a different place. And we have the power to steer that. And informality is one thing we have to live with. And informality in urban areas is, in the cities we saw today, it's the norm. It's not the exception. So if you talk about solutions, you have to talk, and I'm coming to the scales. If you talk about scales, if you talk about systems, we have to see, okay, we are talking about 50% of the population in many cities. We don't have a solution for it, not even small scale. We have small scale attempts, which are nice, which are beautiful, but which you can't go up. I like the model from Brazil. You've seen how the model doesn't work in Bombay. And if you try to do it through the finance world, you will come up with a solution that serves the finance world, but doesn't serve the inhabitants. And now talk always that it always has been done and the old plans solved. There is something new, and that's actually quite nice that there's some issues that are really new. And one is, for example, to recognize the complexity of informality, to have a co-production of knowledge. There is much more consultation, there is much more involvement of inhabitants. We know much more about the informal sector because we talk to it. Another thing is, informality is coming to Europe. We have to recognize that it's very strongly coming back to the Netherlands. There are self-organizing cities, and which is studied now, and the possibility of activists to get involved in urban planning is also something that hasn't been in Europe, where we had a very top-down urban planning mechanism, and now we have something that is coming out of the blue, and everybody likes it, and I think it's a very good, interesting movement. So that's one thing. We have epistemology of knowledge about informality, and what we learn from the South, we can actually sometimes apply even to our North, to our known modern Europe. And the question of what do we? The final question that I'd like to raise also to everybody: whose city is it? It's like it's a catchphrase from the 1950s. But it still is the main question. If you can identify whose city is it, who is the inhabitant, who is the person who can steer and want to steer development in the city, then we have one answer to our question. And delegation is a bit out of time. Delegation was very much in the 20th century. You had local government, you had UN system. The UN system was taking care of the global world. So nice. I sense a little bit criticism about the development cooperation. Also, development cooperation was not able to solve our problems. So it's to go back to ourselves, and the self-organization is the answer to delegation. So instead of having always delegated everything, we take care of ourselves, and I think that's a nice solution actually to the world problem.
I have to disagree very respectfully because I think I really understand what you're saying. Given the reality of informality, we need to accept that people are taking care of themselves. But I would like to connect the problem of defining informality also to the problem of rights, and what are rights in democracies, but also in failed states, in places where the government doesn't work. And I thought the discussion about rights in India, for example, was very enlightening, because people don't have rights in some places, but the truth is they should have rights and they can fight for rights. But okay, yes.
Actually, I was going to say something in the same line. It is that I think there is a point where self-organization and this informal way of creating city. There's a moment in which they have some limitations, and there's a moment in which society must stand up and say, "Hey, we need to act. We need to solve the problems, whether it's sewage or water or whatever." And that, well, you cannot say, "Okay, well, let's self-organize our pipelines and capacity."
I didn't want to say that I don't believe in the rights of citizens. Just very much the opposite. I just say that we have to deal with a world where this is not happening unless we do something about it. Yeah, so it's not about being fatalistic and saying those people will never get their rights, but to really see how we can organize cities in a way that people have really access to services, to their rights, to education. And maybe not just relying on government, but on governance.
Sure, that I agree very, very much, yes. Sorry, I was not supposed to give my opinion, but I just stopped myself. Yes.
I think related to that, I wanted to point an example of something that's happening in Madrid, Europe, with this special case of Canela Real, which is huge to them. And there is a kind of a media report about Canela Real, because the official in the municipalities around, most of them are right-wing, they want to really tear it apart and demolish it. But there is a counter movement of friends of us, part of the network, that started working there to prepare like a counter plan, a plan, an urban plan made with the people, with the inhabitants. And I've been there several times, and I've learned things that are quite astonishing. For example, the inhabitants are quite well organized. And they have the associations and everything. So, for example, they would start construction works of infrastructure, for example, for in English, alcantarillas. Sewage. Okay. So, what happened is that the municipality would send bulldozers to turn down the houses of the leaders of these kind of initiatives, and this is happening in Europe. So what happened then is that these people, these collectives, and along with Canela Real collectives and associations, will start to work in a counterplan, but also in a kind of a propaganda program that would visualize the problem against what the mainstream media would say. Because the mainstream media, according to these politics of the municipalities, will say everything is drug, everything is, the message is continuously, because they do this kind of reports of how the people live in an area and what the problems are. So the general impression from the general public is that, oh, this is awful, this is, we have to make it disappear. So they start this kind of small, like micropolitics, propaganda, guerrilla media, in some ways. And I think that this is an interesting point. It goes on with kind of spreading another kind of governance. And this has, in the last 4 years, this has strengthened the tissue of the associations even more. So now they wouldn't send the bulldozers anymore, for example. And the plan is already done. And the plan is they have the official plan, and now there is the alternative plan. So there are mediators that are trying to make something about this new situation.
Thank you. You had raised your hand long time ago. Oh, yeah.
It was just to take part of the discussion on government yes, government no, etc. Meaning that usually the partners that we work with, they have some sort of relationship with the government. Other times they cannot, meaning that it's a speaking of others, as I showed in my presentation, they really are antagonists per definition, they don't want any kind of relationship. But as Jaap was saying, I guess evidence says that unless you find a way to engage with the government, it's very hard to scale up, because otherwise you really stay small. And our partners in Asia, for instance, have been using, there are programs in Thailand that have been survived 5 changes of government and 2 coups. And the government has been either left or right, in the Asian sense of the term. It's probably something different from the European one. But in any case, government has changed, and the program of working for giving the money directly to the people, that is directly to the communities, that is not the Cody program is about is still on. So what we've learned is usually that the people that are leading this program find the right people in the government to hinge upon. And what I showed you in the Philippines is not a case that they started from Valenzuela City. Meaning in that particular case there was a mayor that was very open to try to involve the people, poor people directly to the discussion and into the planning of this phase. So it's really about trying to understand the potentialities of several of the places that you might work in, and especially these networks that really work at big scales. I've seen them sometimes regretting to give up on a particular settlement or a particular city for maybe 5 years, and there's some really, humanly speaking, ethically speaking, is not really the best thing ever. But they really did know that in those particular 5 years there was nothing to do. So okay, let's move on. Let's build some critical mass around this, and then let's go back when the political situation gets easier for us to work here. But I guess, yeah.
So that's a tactic, a strategy.
Definitely.
Thank you. Other questions?
I would like to come back to your a little bit rhetoric question of who's it. We had a few years ago we covered exactly this who's place, who's public space. But I think that the key issue that we can agree is a very type of governance that we solve at least certain kind of inclusion aspect. And I would like to make a very clear line that what is happening in the, unfortunately not the developing or the emerging economies, is that the economical world is very much a world we simply do not have even the basic needs satisfied with the large populations. Of course, the self-organization that in a way was claimed is termed against in Peru, which is impossible. I mean, you require a larger state and a larger reaction to really be able to cope with these important issues. But on the other hand, the kind of similarities where we appreciate what happened in Europe, what happened in issues in China, is that it's because of the power of the struggle of the money of the government have been diminished enormously. The deviation of power to the municipal level has had enormous significant impact, basically, in the most successful stories of Islamic programs, Colombia, Argentina, Chile, really dedicated to that kind of change, where it's more important to be a citizen of the municipality than really to be, because in a way you have a better process. I mean, this kind of action or activation in the government of the more municipal scale has been an enormous platform to activation of change. This is absolutely related to what we see from the current government as the perspective of a society which is involved. Also, this kind of right and obligation as a key thing that we need to think. So that's when we're talking about the informalization, we need to talk about the needs, the potentialities, but also the obligations. So that changed completely. So for me, a more, even more regularization and clear rules for game need to be settled. Otherwise, it's impossible to really cope with it in a better constructed or more flexible way. But that is the demand that I think is supposed to be.
So local governments and clear rules matter. Yes.
We had a funny example that in Penang actually where the local municipalities started fighting over where the municipal boundary was, because they saw tax dollars, so they wanted as much of the informal areas they could get. So,
yeah, that is.
I was just thinking, of course there are different types of government, and I agree that sometimes where, let's say, at the local level there is much capacity of decision, then there are the more successful project. And there is an interesting book by Benjamin Barber, let's say the behavior should rule the world or something like that. And I kind of agree with that. So maybe itself is a structure of how the governments of the different countries build an impact on this kind of problem. And I also want to do a parallel with the structure of the aid agency that can have like a big Oxfam, like yours, whatever, Capital Free United International, etc. versus like some initiative taken by local NGOs, CBOs. And I think, I mean, even there I see some problem. I really like your initiative, but in the normal plan of Tacloban, there were like all the NGOs there, they were fighting to have by the municipality a piece of land to relocate people. And there was a good Oxfam report that was questioning that. But all the others, they were just doing that. And so that's a problem. In the picture for Christmas with the nice penthouse and the case mining member of the family. So maybe it's really rethinking at the government level that could be interesting.
Well, I'm very happy that we are talking about these things here at the Faculty of Architecture and the Built Environment, because that's what we have been saying all along.
Well, yeah, I just want to say something in hand of this discussion as well, because I was thinking about something, I don't know if it's true or not, but it's always in my head. That basically what we're speaking about all of us here is about alternative ways of generating value or cultivating some kind of quality. But what is really funny is that, for example, we see the developing countries where we have a lot of informality already established, and we more or less try to bring tools which are a bit more formal. So either give them guidance to follow constructions, or either give them some, anyway, bring some formality to the informality. In Europe or Western post-industrial context, we have the contrasting situation that we have extreme formal settlement that failed for one or another reason, and then we try to bring more informality, so we try to tackle it with alternative methods again, but to bring more informality. So I just wonder, is it that it's part of human nature, is that whatever we don't have is more attractive, or is it the balance is the truth, or yeah, what is it about? It's a bit funny at some point that it's exactly like that, it's working like that.
Yeah.
Maybe it's more like driving a car, because I think if you go deep down, really, like what's going on, if you ask really why are we doing it, it's really to get some kind of value, just have a good life. What is good life is, yeah. And yeah, like steering it going more left, right, I don't know. You know, it can be political, it can be anything. But in the end, what I really, and this is what I think I really like, for example, of mapping, is really to have an open and more objective tool or insight where you can really ask, get objective information and say, what are we doing and what are people, and you can compare them on a level basis, have a decision on that, and not ask about just the rule, but really what's going on, how can we help people come to their full potential.
I like the concept of the happy life. It's really important for me. Yes, Yazid, you haven't said anything today.
Well, to follow up on what you said previously, like what do we want in an informal, or do we want more informal urbanization in developed countries, or more formal urbanization in developing countries? I think it's not so much of a boundary between informal or formal, but by acknowledging that people as citizens have certain needs. So that's roof above our head, what Vera told us previously, that's food, that's to have dry feet, and then to follow up, after some time, people have demands too. And those demands will vary from time to time if you're in a certain social, cultural or political position, and if you know what your potentials are, then your demands will also increase. And in a system where there's no place for those demands to develop themselves, because it's either that there's no sewerage, or there's no infrastructure, or there's no clients coming to start up your business, then probably people will try to set up their own systems to create those demands in their own responses. And I think that's what happens for instance, in Canaan, where they're creating their own demands, or as Whereas in the developed world, where sometimes the decisions of designers have been utmost up to the top, where there's no place anymore for this potential to have its own creativity. I think there's a process of over-designing where in each of those situations you have to either have some stimulating framework for creating your own, but also having enough framework to have the systems of what you want. Because I remember a chat that I had previously with Roberto and Becky, and there, I think Becky told us about the first time we went into the slums in Delhi, and that you were trying to find out why people had not finished their buildings and their homes, and at the same time we were letting you in very proudly and showing their marble floor, which they had in the dining. And I remember Becky questioning, like, why do you have a marble floor? Because she didn't even finish the roof. And at some point, having a marble floor was more important, as I remember, because then at least their sons could get yes, it's a social status. So that's a need that the probably put on a longer time framework in order to get their demands fulfilled earlier.
So I think it's a question of formulation of demands and to whom you formulate your demands and how do you strive for. Yes, it's very central. And I think I saw that in the Bartlett presentation where you discussed. I'm sorry to call it the Bartlett presentation. That's ridiculous, I know. But your presentation where there was a discussion about power, who has the power to take decisions, but yes, fair.
I just wanted to react a little bit to what you were just saying about Tapalat. I very much agree. Many humanitarian organizations go with the government default. And actually, maybe a little anecdote, when I arrived in Haiti in January 2011, a year after the earthquake, it was a very urban disaster, I went to an urban planning meeting where 5 urban planners in the room. It was an urban disaster, the biggest humanitarian response in recent history. There are 5 urban planners in the room. So I think it's also very much a field where urbanism, urban planning, whatever terminology you want to use in the humanitarian sector is called settlements, or whatever, but there is no culture of working with the city. There is, at the moment, in my organization, if you mention the word urban, people start freaking out. They don't know what to do with the term urban. There's whole conferences being organized around urban issues because we've learned from Haiti that we don't know how to deal with it, but there is big groups of people like here that do know how to deal with it, but are not involved in this sector. And I think that.
Sure. So
just wanted to add that.
That's a very good point.
And to add more on that, just also to get back to some points. First of all, the UN system is really not taking care of urban. UN Habitat is the smallest organization. They have a very high standard, but it's a very, very poor organization, right? They don't pay you ever. So one thing is really to come back to this thought of the delegation. We delegate to a system that is not capable of taking care of cities. Then we do have, I like this idea about the mayors ruling the world. The local government, my previous director at GIZ, he always said, the local government is the best you can get because you can beat up your mayor. And that's actually true, because we have a quite direct accountability approach. So the far away the delegation is, the less you have access to them. And then the question, which I find very intriguing, about what do we really like? It's like the city we want and what kind of life we like. Also, very clearly, anybody who lives in informality that I've spoken to, they want to be formalized. They want to have a secure life. They like to be secured. And we as Europeans, we live a boring, secure life, so maybe we want to be a bit outside of that. So I think it's something that we have to balance, and we have to see what we can do about it. Now I forgot my last one.
We are coming to the end of our debate because it's quite late, but we have one more question.
Well, one more.
comment, yeah. I don't have any training in architecture or formalism, so I watch this movie like and I don't know, talking about government and how people and communities behave. I don't know. I would like to think that all these kind of projects are a way of people, like, it's a self-diagnose, it's a self-evaluation. Usually when people don't like something about the government, they manifest, they go to the streets, they riot. No? But this is actually people saying like, hey, I understand my community, so I'm actually looking for people, I'm organizing myself. These people, these professionals are telling me how to express my needs to the government. So the government see these kind of projects, they are having a lot of attention through social media, and the people is actually saying like, hey, I mean, I'm here, I'm not in the streets, I'm not writing, this is what I need. So this is, and I think I know how to do it. So I think this is the moment that the government step in, because they also have the input of the people.
So it's an active formulation of a demand. So
yes, I think it's a way of manifesting.
Yeah. Well, if everybody's satisfied, are there pressing, burning questions? Do the speakers, to whom I'm really, really very, very grateful, would you like to make a final statement, or let's go to the wine? All right. Thank you so much for coming here.